My wife cheated with her boss, and he, in turn, attacked me and sued me for allegedly attacking him. But her father is a lawyer. The morning started like any other, with the same familiar routine that had become more instinctive than deliberate. As a former soldier, the discipline stayed with me, even in civilian life. Morning workout, a quick breakfast, and diving straight into the day's tasks. Everything was mechanical. Yet beneath the surface, there was an unsettling feeling, a sense that something was about to shift, though I couldn't quite identify what it was. Reflecting back, I realized that feeling was a warning I should have paid attention to. For years I believed I had built a solid life, marriage, a steady job, and a secure home. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. In hindsight, I should have noticed the fractures before everything fell apart. But the past is unchangeable. All you can do is brace yourself for the impact when it comes. That day, I was blindsided by a betrayal I never saw coming. During my time in the Middle East as a soldier, I survived 3 ambushes, each teaching me critical survival lessons. First, stay alert and anticipate threats. Unfortunately, I missed the signs with Laura and Jack Carson. Second, find immediate cover, which I did by retreating to my bedroom. Lastly, develop a plan to extract yourself from danger. I quickly devised a strategy, changing into casual clothes and discreetly placing my phone in my shirt pocket to record. I went to my closet, retrieved a hidden key from an old shoebox marked Captain J.T. Miller, USMC, and found my Marine Corps-issued Beretta 9mm inside. I had been married to Laura for 7 years, and we had 3 wonderful children, Jason, age 7, and twin 6-year-old girls, Sarah and Emily. My family was everything to me, and I tried to ensure that work didn't interfere with our time together. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood. Our parents lived nearby and frequently visited the grandkids, and Laura's sister lived close by as well. Life seemed perfect until the kids started school, and Laura returned to work. I should have seen the signs, but I was blinded by my trust in Laura's loyalty. She began dressing more provocatively, our closeness faded, and she spent more time at work. When I questioned her, she brushed it off, saying it was a great career opportunity that would benefit us financially. I had met her boss, Jack Carson, several times at social events and Christmas parties. He was the senior partner at her firm, arrogant and dismissive. I never trusted him. The few times I visited Laura at work, he seemed possessive, reluctant to let her leave the office. I hadn't paid enough attention to the growing connection between Laura and her boss. Things fell apart just as the twins finished kindergarten. The kids were spending the weekend with my parents, and I was looking forward to rekindling our relationship. But when I came home that evening, Laura was already dressed up, looking stunning, clearly ready for a night out. "Wow, you look amazing. If I'd known we had a date, I would have rushed home. Just give me a few minutes to freshen up and I'll be ready." "Where are we going?" I asked with a smile. Laura smirked, a look that didn't suit her. "We're not going anywhere. I am, but not with you," she said. I was stunned. "What? What are you talking about?" I asked. "I have a date with my boss, Jack Carson, and that's just the start. From now on, there will be new rules. Jack's picking me up, and I'll be staying with him in a downtown suite tonight and tomorrow. I'll be back Sunday afternoon," she said calmly. "What the hell are you talking about?" I shouted. "Calm down. This is how it's going to be. I'm leaving, and I'll be back Sunday," she replied coldly. "Nonsense. If you think I'm putting up with this, you're wrong. You're out, and don't come back," I said, my anger rising. "No, John. I'm coming home. We're staying married, and I'll still live here. I love you, but I need more. If you make this difficult, you'll be the one leaving. It would be a shame for our kid's father to end up broken in jail. Let's sit down, and I'll explain the changes before Jack gets here in 30 minutes. If he has to explain it, you'll like it even less," Laura said confidently. "If that jerk shows up, he'll get his ass kicked in 31 minutes, I replied. "You won't want to do that," Laura warned. "You need to listen to what he can do to you if you don't cooperate, and he'll have Max with him, his driver and bodyguard. Max is big, mean, and won't hesitate to put you in the hospital." I felt a familiar sense of danger, like I was back in the Middle East, ambushed. On one side was my wife, on the other, Jack Carson. They had the advantage, and I was cornered. I squeezed past Laura and headed upstairs. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "I need to clean up. I'll be down in 5 minutes," I said, trying to regain my composure. As a Marine, I learned 3 rules for ambushes: anticipate, take cover, and plan an escape. I missed the first with Laura and Jack, but I retreated to my bedroom. Then I devised a plan. I changed into casual clothes, set my phone to record, and slipped it into my shirt pocket. I went to the closet and retrieved a hidden key inside an old shoebox marked Captain J.T. Miller, USMC. I found my Marine Corps-issued Beretta 9mm, a pistol that had saved my life in combat. As I loaded the weapon, I heard Laura call from downstairs. "Get down here, John, or you'll regret it." "I'll be right down. Get me a beer," I replied, loading the chamber. I tucked the weapon behind my belt and pulled my shirt over it, making it invisible. I then activated the phone's recording, placed it back in my pocket, and prepared to confront Laura. I was determined to let her talk, to get her to reveal her plans and how she saw the situation, using the interrogation skills I'd learned in the Marines. When I entered the living room, Laura was at the dining table with a glass of white wine and a cold beer set out for me. "It's about time," she said. "We need to talk before Jack arrives." "Sounds like you have a lot to say, Laura. Tell me about this new reality I have to accept," I replied. She started. "I want you to remember that I love you more than anything. I want to grow old with you, and I don't want to hurt you." "No more sweet talk, Laura. Just call me John and I'll call you Laura," I cut her off. She seemed offended but continued. "As of tonight, things have changed, and you need to accept that. Jack and I have been having an affair for almost 7 months. It started with flirting, and now we're very close. I was flattered by his attention, and eventually, it led to more." "Clearly you haven't thought about the consequences," I said. "I'm sorry, John, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. You're still the person I want to spend my life with," she replied. "Good luck with that," I muttered. "Why confess now after months of lying?" I asked. "We were tired of hiding it. We want to enjoy our relationship openly, sleeping together, traveling, and spending time together as lovers. The only way to do that was for you to accept it," she explained. "Good luck with that," I repeated. "No, John, we're staying married. You just need to accept that I'll be spending time with Jack, staying overnight, traveling, and attending events. It will be good for us financially. Think of the benefits: vacations, college for the kids, upgrading the lake house. If you think I want anything paid for with that money, you're wrong," I shot back. "I'm not a gold digger, John," Laura said angrily. "I'm an asset to the company and proud to be Jack's mistress. This won't last forever, maybe a few years, and then things will go back to normal," she added. "Jack also wants to be your friend. He believes we can share as long as everyone gets what they want. He knows I love you and still want you in my life. He might even become a family friend, maybe an uncle to our kids." I was furious but kept my composure. "He will never be around my kids, ever. Do you understand?" Then I asked, "Why would he want to get close to my family? Doesn't he have his own?" "Jack is married to a younger woman from a prominent family, but she can't have children," Laura explained. "Maybe he should adopt and stay out of other people's marriages," I said. "Jack wants his own kids, an heir for his law practice. He'd prefer a son but would accept a daughter too," Laura replied. "Then why doesn't he just use a surrogate and have as many kids as he wants?" I asked. "He mentioned it," Laura replied, "but he feels he'd be a terrible father. He wants any child he has to grow up in a loving family," she added, lowering her head. I felt my anger rising. "So he wants to get you pregnant and have me raise his kid?" "It wouldn't be illegitimate," Laura insisted. "It would be my child too, and I'd love them just like you would because you love me. The baby would have the last name Carson, and Jack would pay us a lot of money to raise them, covering all expenses until they graduate from college." "Are you pregnant yet?" I asked. "No," she answered, "but he wants me to stop taking the pill soon. I told him I wanted you to be okay with this new arrangement first." "This just keeps getting better," I muttered. "Stop saying that," Laura demanded. "I know you're upset now, but we hope you'll come around eventually." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Laura rushed to open the door, and her boss, Jack, entered, wrapping his arm around her and kissing her. "This just keeps getting better," I said again under my breath. "How did he take it?" Jack asked. "Not well. I think you need to explain the consequences," Laura replied. Jack, a tall, slightly overweight man with graying hair, stepped into my personal space, exuding confidence. "Mr. Miller, we need to talk," he said firmly. "Talk? I should kick your ass," I retorted. "You can try," he smirked. "But my driver will be on you before you know it. You'll be in jail tonight, so why not sit down?" I glanced at the large man outside at the door, sighed, and reluctantly sat down. "Great. Now we can talk like civilized people. Your wife agreed to be my personal assistant, which includes some additional responsibilities. We've enjoyed our relationship for 6 months, but we're tired of hiding. You two will have a new arrangement. I'll handle Laura's needs most of the time, at the hotel or office, but occasionally at your home when you're not here." "You think I'm going to accept this?" "I'll divorce her before I put up with this crap," I snapped. Jack remained calm. "Mr. Miller, I suggest you rethink that. I'm a powerful attorney with the biggest law firm in town. If you try to divorce her, I'll make sure you lose everything. Your house, your money, and your kids. You'll be paying alimony and child support while she continues to enjoy life with me. You might even end up in jail, lose your job, your family, and friends will turn their backs on you. I sat there stunned, realizing how far Laura and Jack were willing to go. Jack knew I wouldn't act rashly now. He warned me that any attempt to fight back would bring serious consequences, including physical harm. Be a good boy and accept this new arrangement, he concluded. Your wife is a great assistant. I turned to Laura and asked, "Could you really do this to me?" She responded, "I don't want to, John, but I won't have to if you cooperate. Over time, this will feel normal, and you won't even think twice about it." Still in shock, I watched them head toward the door. Just as they were about to leave, I spoke up. "Before you go, I have a few things to say," I said. Annoyed, Jack rolled his eyes. "Make it quick." I began after a couple of drinks to mourn my marriage. "I'm calling your wife and telling her everything. Then I'll call Laura's sister Karen and let her inform your parents." Jack seemed surprised, as this wasn't the response he expected. "What did you say?" he asked. Ignoring him, I continued. "Tomorrow morning I'll change all the locks. Afterward, I'm taking Kate down the street out for dinner and dancing. She's been flirting with me for months, and until now, I wouldn't have considered it. But things have changed." Laura looked hurt. "John, you can't do that." I pressed on. "When you return Sunday, you'll find all of Laura's belongings in the yard. Pick them up before the sprinklers go off." Jack turned red with anger, clenching his fists as he realized his threats had no effect. Laura looked pained. "One last thing," I added. "Monday, I'll meet with a divorce attorney. I'll file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and name you, Jack, as a co-defendant. I'll also sue you for alienation of affection and for violating your firm's policies. Even if the lawsuits don't stick, they'll publicly embarrass you and damage your reputation." Jack exploded in anger, throwing the overnight bag against the wall and stepping into my personal space, jabbing me in the chest. I resisted the urge to retaliate. "Listen, you fool," he sneered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm Jack Carson, head of the largest law firm in the county. I could destroy you legally in a day. By the time I reach the hotel, you'll be arrested on false charges. You think you can fight me? You can't. I know the police, the DA, the judges. They all owe me favors. If you step out of line, your life will be over." Jack was on a roll, and I let him continue. "If you go out with Kate tomorrow, the police will stop you, find drugs in your car, and you'll spend years fighting charges. No lawyer will take your case against me, and I'll still be enjoying your wife while you're ruined. Do you understand, you fool?" "I believe you," I replied sarcastically. Jack glared at me. "Show some respect. Call me sir or Mr. Carson. One more insult and Max will teach you manners." He tried to punch me, but I was quicker. I pushed him onto the couch. Laura rushed to his side as he screamed, "You'll pay for this! Max, get in here!" The door opened, and Max, a large, intimidating man, entered the room. "Yes, Mr. Carson," he said. "Take care of him," Jack ordered, and Max advanced toward me. Laura tried to protest, but Jack dismissed her with a wave. I expected trouble when Laura mentioned Jack would bring his bodyguard, so I stood my ground. As Max swung his fist at my head, I braced for impact. The pain hit me hard, and I wondered if I'd need a new carpet for the bloodstains. Max hesitated, unsure whether to keep striking me, and looked at Jack for guidance. "Punch him, Max," Jack ordered. Realizing I couldn't take more, I taunted Max, saying, "You hit like a girl." His pride wounded, Max prepared for another punch. Before he could react, I managed to defend myself, and the situation took a sudden and shocking turn. Max looked stunned, realizing he was in a weapon fight. As he fumbled for his weapon, I warned him to stop, and the tension in the room escalated further. I crawled over, grabbed his weapon, and pocketed it. "How much respect do you think I have for you?" I asked Max. He shook his head. "Exactly none," I said. "No reason not to destroy you, right?" Max groaned in pain. I told him if I didn't get him to a doctor soon, he might not make it. As I focused on Max, Laura suddenly shouted a warning, and I turned just in time to see Jack approaching with a fireplace poker. I instinctively tried to block it with my arm, but the force left me in severe pain. The weapon fell to the floor, and in the tense moment, I managed to grab it first, preventing further escalation. "Now where's your phone?" I demanded. Jack hesitated, then pointed to his coat pocket. I pulled out the phone and told him to unlock it. With shaky hands, he did. "Now call your wife on FaceTime," I ordered. Jack's wife answered, confused. "Jack, why are you calling? Who is this?" "Mrs. Carson," I said. "I'm John Miller. You don't know me, but your husband knows my wife, Laura. They've been having an affair for months." Her shock was clear as I showed her Jack's face on the floor. "Oh my God!" she screamed. "Don't hurt him!" "Mrs. Carson," I explained. "Your husband and my wife planned a weekend together. When I objected, He had his driver try to take care of me. Unfortunately for Max, I had to defend myself. She stammered. Jack told me he was working in Palm Springs this weekend. He lied, I replied. He's here with Laura, who was ready to spend the weekend with him. I showed her Laura, pale and trembling on the couch. This is what's really happening, Mrs. Carson. After a pause, she whispered, I'm surprised too. I have to go now. The police will be here soon. It was nice talking to you, I said, tossing the phone aside. Turning back to Jack, I added, well, now your wife knows about your little side activities. What were you planning if I told her? Send Max and his friends after me, right? Jack didn't respond, too focused on clutching his injured leg as blood seeped through his pants. I'll make this clear, Jack, I said, my voice low. If you send anyone after me, I'll destroy them, and then I'll come for you. Understand? Jack nodded, pale and sweating. Then I noticed a foul smell. Did you just soil yourself? I asked, mocking him. Laura looked horrified as the situation spiraled further out of control. The tension in the room was thick, and the fear in her eyes was palpable. Laura, I said, my tone colder than I intended, bring me my briefcase. Nervously, she retrieved it from the hall closet and handed it to me. I opened it, revealing my laptop and a few other items I kept for emergencies. Holding the weapon on Jack, I calmly asked him, Is this the computer you were planning to use against me? Jack remained silent, his face drained of color. I turned the laptop over and placed it on the floor near his head. Without hesitation, I pulled the trigger, firing 2 shots into it. The room echoed with the sound of gunfire, filling the air with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. I leaned in close to Jack, my voice barely above a whisper. Try loading it with anything now, you piece of garbage. Satisfied with the destruction of the laptop, I stood up and walked into the kitchen. My mind was racing, and my head throbbed from the adrenaline and pain. I splashed water on my face, trying to steady my nerves. My reflection in the mirror showed a man on the edge, someone I barely recognized. When I returned to the living room, everyone was still frozen in place. Stay put until the police arrive. They should be here any minute, I said sarcastically as I stepped out onto the porch. Outside, a few neighbors had gathered, their faces etched with concern. One called out, John, were those gunshots? Yes, I replied calmly. Did anyone call 911? A few hands went up. Among the group was Colonel Frank Smith, a retired Marine and my closest friend. Are you hurt, Captain? He asked, his voice filled with concern. You should see the other guys, I replied with a grim smile, just as the sound of sirens filled the air. Colonel, I called out, I need your help. Of course, Captain, he replied, stepping up onto the porch. I need you to help me unload my weapons and put them on the table. I don't want to be holding one when the police arrive, I said, handing him Max's weapon. The colonel quickly disarmed the weapons and placed them on the table just as Kate, another neighbor, noticed my injuries and approached to help. Turning to the colonel, I said, I wish I could explain everything, but there's no time. I had a confrontation with my wife's boyfriend, a powerful lawyer. He threatened to plant drugs in my car and have me arrested. After this is over, could you hide my car if the garage isn't taped off? The code is my street address. Will do, Captain, he replied. Kate added, John, you don't look well. My head is spinning, I admitted. Maybe I got hit harder than I thought. Let's get you seated, Kate said, helping me sit down just as 2 police cars arrived, sirens blaring. The officers made their way through the crowd, weapons at the ready. The colonel assured them there was no immediate danger and pointed to the unloaded weapons on the table. One officer looked at me and said, You need medical attention. 2 ambulances arrived, and medics rushed into the house to tend to Max. Meanwhile, my head was spinning more, and Kate told me to lie down. A medic examined my face and arm, suspecting a broken nose and possibly a concussion. I lost consciousness, and the last thing I remember was Max being carried out on a stretcher and Jack limping to the ambulance. A female officer then escorted Laura outside toward a police car. She stopped when she saw me lying on the porch, tears streaming down her face as she looked at my injured condition. John, I'm so sorry. This isn't what I wanted, Laura cried. I never meant for you to get hurt. She tried to reach out to me, but I pushed her away. Go to hell, Laura, I said coldly. Her handler quickly escorted her to the police car. I'm not sure if I passed out or if the medic gave me something, but I was out for 3 days. When I woke up, my vision was blurry, but I saw a nurse who seemed like an angel in white, though she turned out to be about 60 years old. Mr. Miller, can you hear me? She asked. I'm so glad you're back with us. I must be in a hospital, I said weakly. Yes, she confirmed. You're at Mercy General Hospital. You've been asleep for 3 days. 3 days? I exclaimed. Yes, I'll get the doctor. Just relax. My name is Rose, she said kindly before leaving the room. Left alone, I assessed my injuries. My right forearm was in a cast, my face was bandaged, and my left eye and nose were painful to the touch. Aside from these injuries, I was hooked up to machines, including a saline drip and a blood pressure cuff. I also had a catheter. Rose returned with the doctor, who introduced himself as Dr. Grant. He explained that I had a fractured forearm, a broken nose, and a black eye. He had kept me sedated due to a minor concussion. Since it was late, he gave me something to help me sleep until morning. When I woke up again, I found my left wrist handcuffed to the bed rail. "What the hell?" I exclaimed, tugging at the cuff. "Relax, Mr. Miller," said a voice from across the room. A middle-aged man in a suit introduced himself as Detective Sergeant Adams. "We were worried you might try to run." "Run in this condition? Why would I run?" I asked, bewildered. "You're under arrest," Adams replied calmly. "For what?" I asked, shocked. "Assault with intent to commit grievous bodily harm, assault with a deadly weapon, and several other charges, including unlawful discharge of a firearm. These charges were filed by Jack Carson on behalf of himself, Max Santos, and your wife Laura," he explained. "I should have known," I muttered. The detective read me my rights and left the room. Rose returned quietly to check my vitals. I asked her if she knew about the handcuffs, and she confirmed she did, apologizing softly. I tried to lighten the mood by joking about taking her to dinner when this was all over. Later, Dr. Grant reassured me that my injuries would heal and mentioned that I'd be moved to another room with a different doctor. Shortly after, Detective Adams and some orderlies wheeled me up to the 3rd floor, past a police guard. Once in my new room, the handcuffs were removed, and I was reconnected to the machines. Before leaving, Adams informed me that I'd appear in court via video in a few days to enter a plea. He also said he'd arrange for a public defender to meet with me. As I lay in that hospital room, I reflected on how quickly my life had turned upside down. I grieved for my marriage and worried about my children. Where were they? What were they being told? Who was taking care of them? I also wondered about my job, having been absent for 4 days without notice. The hospital staff couldn't answer my questions. On the 5th day, a young public defender named Mark Hansen visited. He outlined the charges against me, which were the same ones Detective Adams had mentioned. He asked how I planned to plead, and suggested I might negotiate with the DA if I admitted to some minor charges. "I'm not guilty of any charges," I interrupted. Mark seemed surprised but continued. He informed me that Laura had been staying with her sister Karen, and that the kids were with them. The children were only told that I'd be away for a long time. When I asked about my job, Mark offered to contact my company and explain the situation. As I reviewed the charges, I noticed one for spousal abuse. Mark explained that Jack added it after Laura claimed I had slapped her, showing photos of bruises on her face and arm. "I didn't do that," I protested, but Mark seemed doubtful. I didn't trust him enough to explain further, fearing Jack's influence. "Mark, you have to plead not guilty for me," I insisted. He reluctantly agreed, but warned that I'd need to post bail due to the shooting charges. He seemed skeptical of my innocence. I didn't mention that I had evidence proving self-defense, as I didn't want that information getting to Jack or the DA. Instead, I asked Mark to contact my uncle, Jack Wilson, a retired Navy attorney, for help. I instructed Mark to keep this confidential and only inform Uncle Jack of the charges and my plea. Later that night, Mark confirmed that my uncle would arrive soon, and advised me to say nothing except "not guilty" at the trial. The next day, I was arraigned via video from the hospital. I pleaded not guilty to all charges. The prosecutor wanted me held without bail, but the judge allowed me to stay in the hospital for 2 more days before being transferred to jail. The day before my transfer, Uncle Jack arrived. He officially took over my case and got permission to visit me. Seeing him brought me to tears, realizing the weight of my situation. After a brief reunion, Uncle Jack got down to business. He arranged for privacy to discuss the case and updated me on family matters. He reassured me that the kids were fine and staying with Karen until the house was cleared by the police. Karen was confused. Laura had told her what happened and the charges against me, but Karen, knowing me for years, found it hard to believe. She was relieved that Uncle Jack was there to help. Uncle Jack then asked for my side of the story. In a whispered conversation, I told him everything, including how Jack Carson, Max Santos, and Laura had likely concocted a false version of events after my arrest. I also revealed that I had a videotape of the entire incident on my phone, hidden in a kitchen drawer. Uncle Jack didn't show much emotion, but he seemed relieved that there was potential evidence. "I'll be your guardian angel through this," he assured me. "You focus on getting better while I build your defense and look into bail." I also asked him to check on my children, and he promised to coordinate with Karen. After my discharge from the hospital, I was transferred to county jail. 3 days later, I appeared before the judge, where Uncle Jack managed to get me released on bail, though under house arrest. Uncle Jack had rented a townhouse in a gated community where I would stay. He lived there too, and while I couldn't leave the community, at least I was out of jail. Uncle Jack was busy working on the case, including hiring a private investigator to follow leads. The toughest challenge was retrieving my phone from the house without risking legal trouble. He promised to find a way, but knew it would take time. Meanwhile, Uncle Jack set up new cell phone accounts for both of us, ensuring we could communicate. I called my neighbor, the Colonel, who mentioned some strange activity at my house. When I told Uncle Jack, he suggested inviting the Colonel over for beers and steaks. The Colonel shared that about a week after the incident, he saw two men in dark clothing trying to pick the garage door lock. He called 911, grabbed his dog and a bat, and confronted them. Surprised, the intruders backed off but threatened him. The Colonel's dog growled, and he took a batter stance with the bat, which scared them off. They fled in a black SUV with a smudged license plate. The police arrived, took a report, and left. I recalled Jack's threat to plant drugs in my car, so I was relieved that the Colonel had moved it to a safe place. The Colonel had another story. 2 days after Laura returned to the house, he saw a black SUV parked in front. Two men were talking to Laura by the open garage, pointing to the spot where my car usually was. After a brief conversation, they went inside, then left 45 minutes later. The Colonel made sure to note the SUV's license plate number. Uncle Jack checked the license plate against his sources and found it registered to a company called Unique Services, a private investigation firm. The company employed only two people, Jose Gonzalez and Miguel Ortega, both former police officers with checkered pasts. Jose had resigned over a theft issue, and Miguel was fired for falsifying records. Jack Carson's law firm was one of their clients. Retrieving my cell phone from the kitchen became urgent. Uncle Jack decided to call Laura, suggesting a meeting to discuss resolving the situation and possibly dropping charges. Laura knew Uncle Jack from family gatherings but was suspicious. She agreed to meet the next day but insisted that one of her lawyer's assistants be present. Uncle Jack agreed. At 6 p.m. sharp, Uncle Jack arrived at my house. Laura greeted him warmly, and they exchanged a brief hug. She was dressed modestly in a skirt and blouse, her hair in a ponytail. Inside, a young man named Gordon Blake, an associate from Jack's law firm, was introduced. They all sat in the family room, and Laura offered to get coffee. Blake suggested getting straight to business, pulling out a tape recorder. Uncle Jack did the same, and they both smiled. Uncle Jack started by expressing regret over the situation, stating he had always admired Laura and me as a couple. Laura responded sadly, saying she never intended for things to spiral out of control. Uncle Jack continued, implying he believed the charges against me. He mentioned that I claimed Laura and Jack were having an affair, which pushed me over the edge when I saw Jack at the house. Blake interjected, stating that the evidence seemed solid against me. Uncle Jack suggested that perhaps I wasn't in my right mind during the incident, due to the belief that Jack was taking Laura away. Blake considered it, but said they might only entertain that idea if I pleaded guilty. Uncle Jack responded by asking if all charges needed to be admitted, or if some could be reduced or dismissed. Blake said he'd need to consult Jack, who had influence with the DA, and might prefer a quieter resolution to avoid damaging his reputation in business. Before leaving, Uncle Jack reminded Laura that I loved and missed the kids. He also warned her that if my story was proven true, she could face charges for perjury and obstruction of justice. He directed a similar warning at Blake, suggesting that if he knowingly supported a false narrative, he could also be prosecuted. With that, Uncle Jack stood up and asked if he could get some water. Laura pointed him to the kitchen, unaware that retrieving my hidden phone was the real objective. Uncle Jack went to the kitchen, making sure he couldn't be seen from the family room. He noisily opened the refrigerator, then quickly searched the drawer by the sink, finding my phone hidden among dish towels. He pocketed it, poured himself some ice water, and returned to the family room about 2 minutes later. "Before I leave, Laura, is there anything you want to say?" he asked. Laura looked nervously at Gordon Blake, who replied, "We have nothing more to add now, Mr. Wilson. We'll let you know about any changes to the charges, and you'll need to cooperate if you want this case to go away." Uncle Jack thanked them for the meeting and left. He didn't bring the phone back to the townhouse, but instead had it analyzed by Digital Analysis Solutions, DAS. He explained the importance of the video and audio recordings for my defense, and DAS agreed to handle it carefully. They promised to get back to him in a few days. When Uncle Jack and I visited DAS, they had transferred all the phone's data to their server. They found the crucial video and made multiple copies, ensuring it couldn't be lost or tampered with. We watched the video, which clearly showed the events, including Max pointing a weapon at me. Despite some blurry sections, DAS also discovered 97 unopened emails and 64 text messages sent after the incident. Most were from friends and family, but one suspicious message contained 27 photos that would have automatically downloaded to my phone's photo files if opened. It appeared that Jack had tried to plant evidence after I destroyed my computer. Uncle Jack thanked DAS and decided to leave the phone with them for safekeeping, taking a few copies of the videos with him. As we reviewed the evidence, Uncle Jack considered our next steps. He pondered whether to present the evidence to the DA now, which might lead to all charges being dropped and possibly implicate Jack, Max, and Laura. However, if Jack's influence was as strong as suspected, the DA might make the case disappear quietly. Alternatively, we could wait until the hearing, where the prosecution would present its case, and then reveal our evidence, forcing the DA to prosecute the conspirators for perjury, obstruction of justice, and more. That would mean significant jail time, and a better chance of getting custody of my kids. When Uncle Jack asked how I wanted to proceed, I replied, "Let's burn them all." He was pleased. "I was hoping you'd say that, John. I want to expose them publicly and have my Perry Mason moment in court." With 3 weeks until the hearing, Uncle Jack focused on preparing our case. He noted that revealing the video too early might lead to it being suppressed, so he decided to keep it secret until the right moment. A week before the hearing, Uncle Jack took a brief leave to return to San Francisco for his court obligations and family time. During that time, I received a call from the gate guard informing me that Laura was at the gate, asking to see me. I immediately called Uncle Jack, who advised, "If she wants to talk, hear her out, but be polite and don't touch her. Remember, she's dangerous." "Don't worry, Uncle Jack, she's poison to me now," I replied. "You know what you have to do," Uncle Jack said. "Yes, Uncle Jack, I do," I confirmed. After finishing my call with Uncle Jack, I contacted security and asked them to let Laura through. With a few minutes before she arrived, I quickly tidied up the townhouse. I cleared the legal papers from the dining table and tossed them on the bed, gathered up the beer cans, cleaned the kitchen, and loaded the dishwasher. I changed into slacks and a collared shirt, combed my hair, and left my 3-day stubble, which gave me a more serious look. When Laura knocked, I opened the door. She looked great, clearly putting effort into her appearance, wearing a red pleated skirt and a pink cashmere sweater. Her hair was styled in a loose updo, and her makeup was subtle. "Come in, Laura," I said. "You look great." "Thank you, John. You look good too," she replied, complimenting my slim figure. "I've had time to work out and eat healthier," I said, inviting her to sit on the couch. I brought her a glass of white wine and sat with a glass of red. After a few sips, I asked, "Why did you want to see me?" "John, despite everything, I still love you," she began. "I never imagined things would go this far. I thought you would accept my relationship with Jack, and we could have had a lot of money and a good life. In time, things would have returned to normal." "I'm sorry I ruined your plans," I replied sarcastically. "It wasn't my plan, it was Jack's," Laura admitted. "He thought he could intimidate you like he does with others. Neither of us expected you to fight back." "Guess he underestimated me," I said. Out of nowhere, Laura asked, "Where's your car?" I smiled slightly. "I moved it when Jack threatened to plant drugs in it. By the way, what were those men doing at the house after you returned? They seemed interested in the garage and my missing car." Laura hesitated before admitting, "They wanted to plant evidence. I didn't want it, but Jack insisted. You don't seem to mind stacking evidence against me. If you really love me, just tell the truth, and the charges will be dropped." "I can't, John. I'm in too deep. Jack controls everything," she said, her voice breaking. "Guess I'm out of luck," I commented. Then I asked, "What's with the accusation of spousal abuse? I saw pictures of your injuries, but I never touched you." Laura explained, "It was Jack's idea. He came up with a story that you went crazy, accused us of having an affair, and attacked me. Max tried to help, but you shot him. To make it believable, Jack punched me to create the injuries. We've been rehearsing the story ever since." "I'm sorry, John," she added. "I didn't want this to happen. I want things to go back to how they were." "That's not going to happen," I said firmly. Laura then offered a way out. "Jack knows about your PTSD. He wants you to plead guilty based on that. He'll use his influence to get you into a veterans hospital for treatment. In a year or less, you could be released, and we could start over with the kids." So that was the real reason she came to talk to me. She wanted me to plead guilty, promising that Jack would help me get a minimal sentence in a veterans mental institution. I didn't believe any of it, but I didn't let Laura know. Instead, I went along with her. "That sounds good to me, Laura, but I need time to think about it. Plus, I need to talk to Uncle Jack. I think he might agree." He doesn't have much evidence to help me compared to the testimony of you, Jack and Max. Please do this for yourself, John, Laura added. Do it for you, me, and the kids. In a few years it will seem like it never happened. It'll just be a bump in the road. I doubt that, I said. You've been with another man for months, wanted me to be a cuckold for your boss, threatened to take my kids away if I didn't play along, and made false accusations that will put me in jail for years. That's a big bump in the road. That's why I want you to accept Jack's offer. It's the easiest way out for all of us, Laura said, tears in her eyes. Like I said, I'll think about it, I replied. When we were done, I assumed it was time for her to leave. But Laura put her hand on mine and said, Maybe we could rest together for a few minutes. I've missed you in my bed. Is there any chance we can fall asleep together tonight and forget about everything for a few hours? That's not going to happen, Laura, I replied firmly. She got the message. Please accept Jack's offer, she said as I walked her to the door. Before leaving, she gave me a hug. It felt sincere, but I didn't return it. The hearing's purpose was to determine whether I would be held for trial. The prosecution was confident, predictably putting Jack, Max, and Laura on the stand where they shared their well-rehearsed stories. Uncle Jack asked each witness just one question. Do you swear your testimony is truthful? All three answered affirmatively. Uncle Jack wanted to go after Jose, Miguel, and the main witnesses, but proving their attempt to frame me wasn't relevant to the charges against me, especially since their efforts had failed. When the prosecution settled down, it was Uncle Jack's turn. With the court's permission, he began. The defense would like to introduce a videotape of the events as evidence. This tape is exculpatory, Your Honor. Just then, the assistant prosecutor objected, stating, This is new evidence that hasn't been presented for review. There's a reason for that, Uncle Jack explained. The defense fears bias from the district attorney and the court, and that our evidence will be unfairly blocked. Do you have proof that the district attorney is compromised, Mr. Wilson? The judge asked. The proof is on the video, Your Honor, Uncle Jack replied. The judge, starting to rise, said, Then you and the prosecution will come to my chambers where I will review the tape and decide on its admissibility. Uncle Jack interrupted. No, Your Honor, we won't do that. Why not? The judge demanded, his anger rising at the defiance. Because, Your Honor, Uncle Jack explained, the defense doesn't trust the court to be impartial, and we won't risk you suppressing our evidence. The judge, visibly perturbed, asked, Are you accusing the court of corruption, Mr. Wilson? Possibly, Your Honor, Uncle Jack responded. Can you prove your accusation, Mr. Wilson? Or is that proof also on the tape? The judge pressed. It is on the tape, Your Honor, Uncle Jack confirmed. However, I can demonstrate my point if you answer a few questions. The judge, skeptical, clarified. Let me get this straight, Mr. Wilson. You believe you can prove the court's bias against your client by asking me a few questions. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Uncle Jack affirmed. The judge, now curious, said, Very well, Mr. Wilson. Ask your questions, but if you fail, we'll review the tape in chambers, and I'll rule on its admissibility. I accept, Your Honor, Uncle Jack agreed. But know that if this videotape is deemed inadmissible and my client is convicted based on the testimony of the 3 prosecution witnesses, I will release the tape to the media and online, regardless of the court's ruling. Furthermore, the tape contains evidence that will call your integrity into question if you don't release it. The judge, feeling threatened, remarked, I feel like I'm being threatened, Mr. Wilson. Before the judge's anger could escalate further, Uncle Jack quickly asked, Your oldest son is in college, isn't he, Your Honor? Yes, the judge replied cautiously. He's attending the Air Force Academy, correct? Uncle Jack continued. Yes, the judge nodded. He's a freshman. Getting into the Air Force Academy is very competitive, isn't it? Uncle Jack asked. The judge nodded again. It is. Your son had to apply through your district's congressman or senator. Afterward, he was scheduled for a civil service exam. Based on the results, he was selected, along with 9 others, to attend the academy. He was sent to a nearby Air Force base for a medical exam, physical fitness test, and aptitude tests as a pilot and navigator. Additionally, he had to take college entrance exams. Is that all correct, Your Honor? Yes, the judge replied, pride evident in his voice. He got an A- in high school and was on the swim team every year. You're understandably very proud of him, Your Honor, Uncle Jack continued. Growing impatient, the judge demanded, State your point, Mr. Wilson. Uncle Jack pressed on. Your son's application packet also included 3 letters of recommendation, correct? Quite correct, Mr. Wilson, the judge confirmed. Who were those letters from, Your Honor? Uncle Jack asked pointedly. The judge hesitated before finally admitting, Mr. Jack Carson wrote my son a recommendation for admission to the Air Force Academy. Uncle Jack seized the moment. Mr. Carson must have known your son very well, unless he fabricated a letter full of falsehoods. The judge clarified, My son worked in Mr. Carson's office during his sophomore and junior years of high school. He wants to be a lawyer someday. So Mr. Carson is a family friend? Uncle Jack inquired further. He's more of an acquaintance than a family friend and a professional associate in some legal organizations I belong to, the judge explained. So now, Your Honor, you can understand the defense's concerns about your impartiality in this case. Uncle Jack concluded his questioning. The judge responded, "You've put me in a position that questions my integrity, counselor. Let me assure you that any association with Mr. Carson will not influence my decisions, but you've raised a matter of perception." The judge paused for a moment, then looked up and said, "Turn on the video, counselor." Uncle Jack instructed the bailiff to dim the lights and lower the projection screens on either side of the judge's bench. Uncle Jack turned to me and said, "Showtime, John." He pressed the enter key and the video began to play. The entire scene unfolded before the judge, the prosecution, and the courtroom audience as Jack threatened me, saying, "I personally know most of the top police officials. I'm friends with many of the attorneys in the DA's office. I've even had fun with some of them." There was an audible gasp from the prosecution bench. The assistant DA put her head down on the table and began to sob. We all stared at her for a moment before she gathered her things and quickly left the courtroom, still crying. Uncle Jack continued watching the video. Jack, Max, and Laura tried to quietly leave the courtroom together, but they were easily noticed. The judge explicitly ordered them to remain seated. The remaining ADAs watched the video to the end. The lead prosecutor stood up quickly, clearly wanting a break, but before he could ask, Uncle Jack said, "I have another video." Without waiting for permission, Uncle Jack queued up the second video and explained that it had been recorded 2 weeks earlier when Laura visited me at my townhouse. He then pressed enter, and the video began. Laura realized the full impact of the video. It showed her confessing everything Jack had tried to do to me. She screamed, "John, how could you do this to me?" After a few minutes, Jack also grasped the gravity of the situation. "You fool. You stupid, stupid fool. You let him record you? What were you thinking?" he exclaimed. Laura had no idea that when she visited me, I had set my phone to record everything she said. The phone was on the coffee table in front of her, hidden by books and papers. I turned it on just before opening the door to let her in. The ADA requested a recess to review the new evidence. Uncle Jack handed the ADA copies of the videotapes on DVDs. The trial was adjourned until the next morning. The next morning, the 3 prosecution witnesses were conspicuously absent. Instead of the acting district attorney, the county's real district attorney sat at the prosecution table. The judge allowed him to speak first. "I'll be brief, Your Honor," he began. "First, all charges against Mr. Miller are dismissed. We believe he acted in self-defense when he defended himself against Mr. Carson and Mr. Santos. It was a rather violent self-defense, but it was self-defense. Second, my office has issued arrest warrants for Mr. Jack Carson, Mr. Max Santos, and Mrs. John Miller for conspiracy to commit perjury, bribery, perjury, assault with intent to cause grievous harm, making false statements to police, filing false complaints, and obstruction of justice. Additionally, my office was informed that Mr. Carson attempted to plant false evidence against Mr. Miller. Mr. Santos and Mrs. Miller were aware of this. We have also identified 2 suspects working for Mr. Carson who attempted to plant false evidence, and we are in the process of arresting them. Jack Carson, Max Santos, and my wife were arrested, but later released on bail. The district attorney was furious to discover that his office had been compromised by Jack Carson over the years, and he began rooting out all his colleagues involved with Carson. Eventually, all the defendants were convicted. Jack Carson was the only one who pled not guilty, which proved to be a mistake, as both Max and Laura pled guilty and testified against him. Carson was sentenced to 11 years in prison. Max received a 7-year sentence, and Laura was sentenced to 5 years. Jose and Miguel were arrested for attempting to obstruct justice and tampering with evidence. The district attorney played them against each other until Miguel broke down and confessed, hoping for a lighter sentence. Both ended up serving long prison terms. Jack Carson was held in county jail until he was transferred to state prison. Max and Laura, however, were given 2 weeks to get their affairs in order before surrendering to the sheriff. Max spent that time preparing his family for his 7-year absence, hoping to be paroled in 4 years with good behavior, as his lawyer had advised.